Alrighty, we are in our second letter in the book of Psalm 119. Psalm 119, we're in our second letter. We are on the letter Bet. Bet. And so the first letter is Aleph. So if we're saying these together, we're learning our alphabet. We would say this, Aleph, Bet. Those are the two that we know so far. So turn, if you would, to Psalm 119, and let's dive in. Psalm 119. Psalm 119. Basically the very, very middle of your Bible, Psalm 119. If you can't find it, just go to the middle and keep looking in the middle. Psalm 119. Of course, we know this from last time. Psalm 119 is divided up into 22 even sections of 8 verses. Each section is one for each Hebrew letter. It is called an alphabetic acrostic. And so if you were to read this in English, let's just pretend it was English for a second just so I can explain it. In English, if you had verses 1 through 8 would all begin, the very first letter of the first verse would all begin with A, so it'd be A, 8 times in a row. When we get to Bet, or the B, it would all begin, first letter, first word of each verse, B, like that. You don't see that in your English Bible because we're talking about the Hebrew. Of course, this is translated from the Hebrew, so you lose that acrostic, but it is there. Now, what is the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet? Well, it's the word Bet, like we said, and remember, this is called gematria. Remember, in gematria, it's the numerical value of the Hebrew letters. Hebrew letters all are given a value of them as well. In this case, the value is 2. It has the, if one, Aleph, one has the idea of oneness, has the idea of God being complete in himself. Aleph has the idea of supremacy of God, has the idea of leader or strong. And when Bet comes along, it has the idea of 2, has the idea of two-ness or a duality. Now, the best illustration I can possibly give you of this is to show you a few things. Now, inside this, that's right, we have an illustration. And it says, I'm going to show you a couple things. Can you guys see that? I have some things in here. I have a remote control. I've got a handy dandy dry erase marker. And I've got a handy dandy water bottle for when I am thirsty. I have a question for you guys. How many items do you see? Yeah, don't get too, I'm not counting the box. Don't get too technical. Some of you smart people, I know where you're, this isn't a trick. There's no trick here. But how many items do you see? Okay. Now, okay. How many items do you see? Okay. It's not trick, so you're all right too. Now, here's my question for you. This is the best way to understand the word Bet. What does a dry erase marker have to do with water? What do they have to do with each other? Not a trick question. Really nothing. What do either of those have to do with the remote control? What commonality do they have? Nothing. But how come I did not ask any of you how many items were in the box? I didn't say that. I just said, how many items? How come you didn't count the iPad? How come you didn't count the piano or anything else in here? You counted only the items in the box. Why? Your brain automatically did that. What relationship did they have to each other? There was only one commonality. They were in the box. Bet shows relationship to each other and has the idea of in. It has the idea of creation. Its pictorial or pictogram is house. In fact, the letter itself resembles a house. If you can see that, it has a roof and a backside and a floor. It's open on one side, and there's a reason for that. When we get a little bit deeper, we have more time, which is not today. I'll get into why it's facing away from the Aleph. Remember, Hebrew reads right to left, and if Aleph, I have it on the board over here, if Aleph is number 1, numerical value 1, strength, God, preeminence, then Bet has the idea of two-ness or duality. Interestingly, the opening for the Bet is not facing the Aleph. That's on purpose. You'd think if it was having to do with a relationship, meaning in, the things that are in the house have a relationship to each other, you think it would face it, but it faces away from it. The answer for that is found in the dream of Jacob's ladder, but I'll have to save that for another time. It's very interesting. But if I were to tell you that my wife and I, Sarah and I, are in a very good spot. We're in a very good relationship. We love each other very much, and we enjoy spending time with each other. She's my best friend. I love being around her, and I stay at the Holiday Inn while she's at our house. What would be your response to that? Yeah, what? Why? Why? We just prefer our own space. No, the reason why we live in the same house is because we've aligned our goals in life. Did you know that her goals for finances are the exact same as mine? Did you know our goals for our walk with Christ are the exact same? We've aligned our goals. Our goals for our children are the exact same. We've aligned our goals, and we live in the same house. Now, you say, well, of course, you're married. That's the point. I haven't invited any of you to come live in my house. Aren't you glad? And all God's people said. But you don't live in my house, and you should be thankful for that. But you don't live there, and you and I are friends, but we're not in covenant with each other the way that Sarah and I are. To be in the same house shows relationship. Now, let's kind of keep all that in mind. This section of 8 verses are having to do with relationship. It has to do with God creates a house that he stays with you inside of. Now let's think about this in terms of the Bible. We'll go over this another time. I'm going to show you this again next week. A little bit hard for you to see there, but you can see the pictograms, the bait there. You can see how to draw that on your own. We'll get into that. We don't have time today. I'll skip it. But this is the way to think about this. Since verses 9 through 16 are all about relationship or the relationship to each other. Items in the house are in relationship to each other because they're in the house. The items had nothing to do with each other until I put them in the box. The moment I discarded the dry erase marker has now nothing to do with these two. These two have a relationship to each other because they're both in the box still. That is how bet works. That's the thinking of the Hebrew people when they see the word bet. It's a relationship to each other, and God is the one that made the box. God's the one that makes the house. God makes the house. God stays in the house. God has a relationship with you in the house that he makes. So that's the way we think of this. Now, all of our relationships are in a house. They're represented by the word bet. Think of the word Bet-lehem or Bethlehem. Bethlehem means house of bread. So you hear the word bet in there. And that first part means house. Now, we're going to see in this section all that the Father expects for those who want to become in the same house as him. For those who want a relationship with him. This section of 8 verses have to do with, Lord, I want to be in the same house as you, bet. I want a relationship with you. And here is the psalmist writing about this idea of being in relationship with the Lord. Now, here's some things to consider. The entire Bible really is about a house. Consider this. God made a house. Remember, when we talk about the earth, we talk about the foundations of the deep. We talk about the vaulted ceilings of heaven. It's describing the picture of a house. It uses it in terms of you would build a house. All of creation, wish I had more time to go into that, I do not. But all of creation is describing it in metaphorical language as a house. God is built as a house. Remember, and then after Adam fell, then he moved to the next plan was the people from Abraham. And we start saying things in terms of the whole house of Jacob, the house of David. Well, it's not a house, it's people. But he's using the metaphor of a house to bring about his relationships. And then the craziest thing happens. God becomes a house. Look at this in John 1:14. And the Word, that's the Word of God, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. That word dwelt literally means tabernacle, like the tabernacle of the Old Covenant. That word dwelt means tent. So it says here that the Word became flesh and tented among us. And remember, we beheld his glory. The glory is of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. Now listen to how the NLT puts it, just to put a new spin on these wording. So the Word became human and made his home among us. And listen to what Jesus says in John chapter 2. So the Jews answered and said to him, what sign do you show us since these things? Jesus answered and said to them, destroy this temple. He was speaking of Herod's temple. And in 3 days I will raise it up. Well, was he speaking of Herod's temple? That's what they thought. The Jews said, it's taken 46 years to build this temple. Now they're pointing at Herod's temple. And said, you'll raise it up in 3 days? But he was speaking of the temple of his body. Jesus built the garden to have a house, to have community. They got kicked out of that house. God builds the house of Jacob. Through the house of Jacob, Jesus is born and said, I'm here to tent with you. He looks at the temple, he says, I'm going to destroy that and rebuild it in 3 days. They said, it took us 46 years. One guy, now we know you're loony, man. You're loony. 46 years. An army of people took 46 years. You alone, 3 days? I don't think so. But they missed something. They missed the hermeneutic. What was it? He was speaking about himself. He was going to be the new temple. And then, not only did God make himself into a house, but the third thing he did was he made us into a house. And this house that he made us into has many, many rooms. You could almost call it a city house. Look at this. You know what? I didn't have it on the slide. Let me just talk through them for the sake of time. 1 Peter 2, 4 through 5. Revelation 3:12. We can look these up later. But Revelation 3:12 is the one where he says to the church of Philadelphia, if you're obedient, I will make you pillars in the city, in the new Jerusalem. Revelation 20, 1 through 3. Remember, John sees a city coming down as a bride adorned for her husband. Then he says in verses 9 through 10, come, let me show you the bride. And then he shows them the city. That's us. We're likened unto the city. In 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 and 5, remember, God changed Simon's name to Peter. What does Peter mean? Stones or rocks. And then Peter picks up on this metaphor, and Peter says in 1 Peter 2, 4 and 5, he says that Christ has built us up as unto living stones. And we're stones that make up a house. So this idea of bet has to do with relationship. Now let's go ahead and read it. Here's what's so neat about this passage. We only have about 5 or 6 minutes left to go over these 8 verses. But here's the thing. Now that we've determined what bet means, you'll be able to get all of the meaning yourself from this, because that's what unlocks this. So this is the psalmist is saying in here, I want to know how to be in a house with you. Does that make more sense? I want to know what the house rules are. I want to know how I can act. Or maybe I could say this, I want to be in a house with you, Lord. I want to be in a relationship with you. And here's the things that I'm determined to do that. Does that make sense? Here we go. So let's look at verses 9 through 16. He says this, how can a young man cleanse his way? By taking heed according to your word. In verse number 9, the psalmist is saying, to come to you, to live in your house, I know that I must be cleansed. I know that you allow no unclean thing to come before you. Verse 10, with my whole heart I have sought you. Oh, let me not wander from your commandments. This has the idea of, if I'm not wandering, you would never say, man, I've been wandering all over the place today. And I say, oh, well, where have you been? I've been in the living room, and then I went to the laundry room. I'd be like, you're wandering around all over the place? You mean you took some steps in your house? Being in your house is the opposite of wandering around. Home base is about as opposite as you can get as wandering around. What does he say? With my whole heart I have sought you. Oh, let me not wander from your commandments. I want to be secure with you. Single-mindedness means the idea of whole heart. I want to seek you I don't want to have a fractured relationship with you. I don't want to have one mind outside of your house and one mind inside, or part of my mind inside. I'm all in on this relationship with you. I want to be in the box with you. I want to be counted among the people who are in relationship with each other by their proximity to you in what you have created. And I want to do that with all my heart. In other words, I'm diving in. I'm not gonna go in the shallows and keep my hand on the side of the pool. I want it to be over my head. There's no going back. I love you. That's what he says in verse 10. He says, with my whole heart, let me not wander. And notice what you don't wander from. His commandments. The house are his words. Let there be light. The very first letter in the Torah, or we would say in the Old Testament, or in the whole Bible, Genesis 1:1, in the beginning is one word, barashit in the Hebrew, and it begins with bet. You would think it'd be aleph because that's the first one, but no, it's the creative, connective word. It's the relationship word. It's the first letter, because that's the whole point of the whole Bible is relationship. So he starts with a creative word, a creative house word that creates in the beginning This is the story of creation and your dwelling with me and your relationship with me. Verse number 11, your word I have hidden in my heart that I might not sin against you. I want to not offend the homeowner. You know that feeling when you're in somebody else's house and you may have offended them? Or maybe we could say it this way, when you're staying with somebody, you don't want to offend them. That's what this verse is talking about. I don't want to offend the homeowner. I'm going to listen to what you have to say. Verse 11, your word have I hid in my heart that I might not sin against you. Here's the rules of the house. The rules of the house are, know the rules, hide them in your heart so that you can follow the rules. Lord, your word have I hid in my heart, that our relationship may not be hindered by the breaking of the rules. Verse 12, blessed are you, O Lord, teach me your statutes. The psalmist is saying, I must be taught to think the way that you think. If I'm going to be in your house, I want to say the things that you say. I want to ignore the things that you ignore. I want to shout in the places you shout. I want to whisper in the places that you whisper. I want to think like you. I want to make decisions like you. I want to echo what you have to say. I want to react like you react. I want to minimize where you minimize. I want to maximize where you maximize. Help me emphasize the things in life that you emphasize. Lord, help me be like you. Blessed are you, O Lord. Teach me your statutes. Verse 12. Let's go on, verse 13. With my lips I have declared all the judgments of your mouth. With my lips I have declared all the judgments. Can I reword that for you? Verse 13. I should be able to cite the expectations you have. These are things you'd want your children to say. Would you just fall over if you told your kids or grandkids and say, now here's the rules, and they said, can I repeat it back to make sure I got it right? You go, hang on. Whew. Fall over, go, pick yourself, go, yeah, that'd be great. You can go ahead and repeat, say, you want us to do this, not this and this. Did I get it right? I just want to really make sure I understand it so that we can really have peace in this home. You say, yeah, that's great. You walk away, where did that come from? What a great kid, you know? That's exactly what this verse is saying. Saying, with my lips I've declared all the judgments of your mouth. I'm going to start talking like you. I want to start being in agreement. I'm going to come in agreement under the relationship that I have with you, because this is your house. This is the relationship that I have with you. Verse number 14. I have rejoiced in the way of your testimonies as much as in all riches. In other words, I'm different today than I was outside of your house. I have, verse 14, I have rejoiced in the way of your testimonies as much as in all riches. I have experienced things outside of our relationship, Lord. I've experienced maybe even riches outside of my relationship with you. I've had material things outside of your house. They don't compare to just being in your home, to being in proximity with you, Father, to being in relationship with you. I rejoice in the way of your testimonies. And this is what's crazy. I do that as much as in all riches. I mean, I could have the riches of the whole world. And my rejoicing in just knowing you and being in your house, I rejoice just as much because you're down the hall from me and I get to stay with you. And now I'm counted among the things that are in relationship to you. And you're the one that's made the difference, Father. You're the one. I have brothers and sisters that are in the same house. And the commonality that we have, we're as different as the marker and the drink and the remote. In other words, this is a future tense idea. If I could reword it this way, my relationship with you is ongoing. Notice he says, I will meditate on your precepts and contemplate your ways. This is an idea for tomorrow. I'm planning on, when I'm in a relationship with you, Lord, I'm not going to draw on past spiritual successes. You hear people say, man, in the 70s, man, we were on this bus route. We used to pick up all these kids. And hey, those are great memories. I have good memories too. I can remember things that I've done going back to, I was a runner on a bus route when I was 12. That was my job, to get off the bus, go knock on the door and say, hey, the church bus is here, and pick up these kids. And man, I can really remember packing up buses and and leading kids in prayer and singing songs and going over speed bumps and trying to hang on and, okay, we'll see you guys next week, and being exhausted at the end of the day. I remember doing that. You know what? It'd be awfully sad if I drew on that every day for my strength of the Lord. I want fresh stuff. Don't you want fresh stuff? I need fresh stuff. And if I'm going to be in this house with the Lord, I can walk down the hallway and I can ask him a question. I can hear him speak to me. And that's what's being said here is, I did enjoy these riches, but now I rejoice just as much being in proximity to you. And by the way, verse 15, this is my plan being in your home. I will, future tense, not I will delight myself in your statutes. I will delight myself. Tomorrow I will. And by the way, I will not forget your word. Look at what it says in verses 15 and 16. My relationship with you is ongoing, verse 15. And verse 16 is saying this. I'll be happy to do as you say. I won't forget what you say. This is a total attitude of submission to be in this bet, to be in this house of relationship. And so our approach to being in his home is very simple. And it may be hard to see here in person on the screen, though. Somebody had mentioned this last week, so I figured I'd throw this up there. But you can actually see that somebody has taken this and they took some liberty and tried to take these verses, and they all start with B. You can see this. I'll put this up online. You can read those on your own, but just thought that was a little bit creative. This gives you an idea of what they see in Hebrew, just so you kind of get the idea. The first letter, first word, all starting with the same letter. So that is the word bet. So we have Aleph. Aleph means God, beginning, strong one, numeric value of 1. And then we just went over bet, value of 2 in Gematria, the house, relationship, proximity to God in relationship with him. Next time we get together, we'll be on the third letter called Gimel. Try to put those together. So Aleph, Bet, Gimel. So if you want to do a little research this week on the word Gimel, that'll give you a little head start for next week. You'll enjoy it even more the more you know about it, because we don't have nearly enough time to tease it all out. But anyway, there is the letter Bet.